here at the American Legislative Exchange Council's year-end meeting. It's called the States and Nation Policy Summit. It's been in D.C. We've been talking states. We've been talking nation. Let's talk about all those things with our next guest, frequent friend of the show, Jonathan Williams. He's on site with us as well, Swamp from the land of make-believe. Jonathan, good afternoon, and thanks for joining us at the end of what has been a very busy week for all of us here at ALEC.
Well, it sure has, but it's been a great week with about 1,000 of our closest free market freedom fighters across the country coming into Washington, and this is the most conservative voices this city has seen in a long time. It's been a great week.
So I was going to start us off, Jonathan, with the headline of the day that ALEC participated in, and that was the fact that Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, they were here. They visited Capitol Hill, and then Vivek Ramaswamy delivered remarks regarding DOGE and more at the ALEC meeting to wrap up the afternoon's, help wrap up the afternoon's festivities. Jonathan, what did you think about his remarks? And do you think state lawmakers are thinking maybe a DOGE caucus or a DOGE committee in our state as well?
Well, absolutely. Vivek's remarks were spot on. And the thing I appreciated about it the most was, talking, a little bit about DOGE. I know we're really early in the process there. But, what his overall kind of remarks that really hit home, I know, with the ALEC audience is a key to this entire process of how do we get rid of police fraud and abuse, and how do we downsize government down to its proper size as intended by the founders, is really only able to be accomplished if we really double down on this ALEC idea, a quintessential American idea of federalism, that not all the decisions should be made here. And we can have separate debates about whether something should be done by government versus the private sector opportunities. But this has been the question. Who should be doing that function? It could be federal, state, or local. And in so many of the cases, as you both know, as your listeners know, well-educated listeners that, understand the principles of the American founding, know that the founders said the things that should be done in Washington should be very few and well-defined, and the other things should be done by the state and local governments, even more importantly, by churches and synagogues and families and individuals. And so I think Vivek's comments really hit home today on that front to say, what he said today was, if we're successful with DOGE and getting government size and scope reduced here in Washington, that's going to mean a lot more work for ALEC and a lot more work for our state members across the country, a lot more work in just sitting in state capitals. And fundamentally, that's a good thing for America.
Jonathan, in 27 more days, it will be 2025. And ALEC, has a new publication out called The Essential Policy Solutions for 2025. Give us an overview.
Well, it's our annual publication where we look at what are the big priority issues that we're hearing about from state legislators that we on the ALEC team overseeing all 50 states from a policy perspective and developing model policy and policy solutions. What are we seeing as the trend? And, once again, we're seeing a huge amount of focus on this school choice, education, freedom revolution sweeping the country as parents are fed up with bureaucracy and with people telling them they shouldn't be involved in their kids' education. Literally, this is what some of the teachers' unions continue to say to this day. And parents are incredulous that this will continue. So I think we're going to see many states in the early weeks in 2025 continue what nearly a dozen states now have done on giving the power back to parents and giving them the choices with their own resources back. That's going to be a huge priority. Once again, it is a main feature in the publication. Additionally, as we've seen in news stories all across the country, the strain on electricity grid, right? In the way that we need to make America energy, not just independent, but America energy dominant is a key element, I know, of the incoming Trump administration, as it was in Trump 1.0. I think we're going to see a renewed focus there. We're seeing a renewed focus from states to say, get away with these anti-American policies like ESG that have been crippling us from a perspective of having reliable, affordable energy. And by the way, clean energy in America, when it's produced here versus when it's produced in countries that have no regard for the environment or basic clean air and clean water standards. And then the other one is economic opportunity is a major theme, whether it's the tax cut revolution. I fully expect to see lawmakers in just city and state capitals all across the country continuing to work on reducing taxes, empowering taxpayers, and limiting government spending. And so, those are three of the big priorities. We call them the 3 E's: economic opportunity, education, freedom, and energy independence. But those are just a few of the big themes. It's a great publication. Hopefully, I've really checked it out. it's chock full of resources for citizens and for state legislators across the country.
Jonathan, one of the ongoing fallacies of the left and the enemies of free markets, federalism, and limited government, which is the three key points of ALEC's mission statement, is that government needs more revenue in this day and age and higher taxes. Jonathan, we've seen this tax experiment playing out across the 50 states over the last 15, 20 years. It's been very aggressive. And Jonathan, isn't it true? And Missouri's been right in the middle of all this because we're surrounded by 8 neighboring states, most of which are being very aggressive when it comes to limiting and lowering the regressive, I think, immoral tax on labor, the income tax. Jonathan, isn't it true that the states that have been lowering and cutting their taxes have seen increases in state revenues, whereas the high tax states are now dealing, now that the COVID cash has run out, they're now dealing with budget deficits because they have high taxes and they also have extremely exorbitant spending. Talk about the lay of the land on that.
Well, yes, and the good news is our side of empowering taxpayers and trying to reduce the tax on labor, as you put it, we're continuing to be on the offense. We're seeing about 25 states in the last 4 years substantially cut their personal income tax rates, for instance, which is great for not just individuals on that tax on labor, but small businesses who are the lifeblood of communities and the real job creators across the United States. And, you mentioned the point of the argument where people will say, we need the government short on revenue. It's kind of a laugh line in most of America. But when you look at the states that have followed that approach, like California, New York, and Illinois, especially, among others, I mean, these are states with some of the highest out-migration as people vote with their feet, as businesses pick up and relocate and leave, or major corporate headquarters, as we've talked about in the past, like even the Chevron Corporation leaving California for Texas. Yeah, that means loss of revenue on the flip side. And when states do the right thing, they cut taxes, they become more competitive, they actually gain population, which then leads to this increase in revenue. And that is one of the greatest untold stories, certainly by the liberal corporate media out here in Washington, D.C., and New York City. They will not touch that. But we know, based on the reality of the situation, states that have long track records, like North Carolina, for instance, that has been one of the biggest tax-paying states in the last decade, hundreds of thousands of new residents coming in. And guess what? They're not just new residents, they're new taxpayers. And that's the key to actually raising new revenue. If you're worried about more revenue, it's bringing more taxpayers into your state, not by raising tax rates. And that's the key.
Jonathan, just closing up here, I want to thank you and ALEC and Tim. Of course, I'm with Americans for Citizen Voting, and you helped us draft model legislation for that. And we went 8 for 8 in this last cycle. In 8 states that we had this on the ballot, it passed. So I want to thank you and ALEC for helping us achieve that and helping us draft the model legislation. Well,
it's such a common sense piece of legislation, only in a sense that people are wondering, why do we even need this? Isn't this common sense? But, it turns out in this day and age, we sometimes need to clarify what common sense could look like. And we see some of the bad answers. So we realize that, yes, we could put the line in the sand on things like this that otherwise could be common sense. And one thing I should mention is we had a couple of the great heroes of that, at least in Missouri, here with us, with Ben Brown and Ben Baker, for instance. And we actually had Representative Baker receive our ALEC Legislator of the Year award this week here on site, in part because of his efforts there to refer that to the ballot. And, of course, Missouri voters agreed with Mr. Brown and Mr. Baker.
Yeah, Jonathan, I'm glad you mentioned that. We would have been remiss if we didn't mention that. There's thousands of awesome legislators in state capitals across the country. Jonathan, it's really notable, isn't it, that Representative Ben Brown, who was chosen as one of ALEC's 50 under 50 last year, Senator Ben Brown, was recognized in that regard. And now his partner on the only citizen voting anti-ranked choice voting measure, which is the first to pass into a constitution in the country by nearly 70%. Kudos to Chris and Becky Arps for all of their roles in that. Once again, comes from Missouri. Representative Ben Baker being chosen, therefore rightly so, for the National ALEC Legislator of the Year. Missouri's got a lot to be proud of, don't we?
We do.
Well, there's a lot of common sense coming from the Midwest. As a fellow Midwesterner, I just think that so many of the good ideas are coming from states like Missouri, which, of course, the liberal elite here in Washington and in California, we consider flyover country. It's where so many of the good ideas are coming across the country. And by the way, as I've always said, this gentleman, is if we had more Midwesterners out here in Washington running the show, our country would be a whole lot better.
Be sure it would be. Folks, if you want to check out ALEC and find out more of what we're talking about, all you got to do is go to ALEC.org. That's ALEC.org. You can follow Jonathan at Tax Economist on Twitter. He is the chief economist and the executive vice president for policy here at the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC.org. Jonathan, thanks for a great week. Really looking forward to a successful 2025 in the laboratories of democracy in the states. Thank you for everything. And you make sure you be safe throughout the holiday season here, neck deep in the swamp.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Thanks, gentlemen. Merry Christmas. We don't talk before.